It all started with a very simple idea. Tell the stories of how successful middle market CEOs made it to the corner office. I'm Brant Handley, founder and managing director of Resource Options International, or ROI. We're the USA's premier executive search firm focused exclusively on empowering middle market companies to attract, hire, and retain A players while transforming top executives' careers and lives. ROI's Into the Corner office is dedicated to discovering how middle market CEOs advance their career, and we're making these remarkable and sometimes quite unbelievable stories available to you for the very first time. Listen and learn about the challenges they've overcome, the interesting people they've met along the way, and the lessons learned that steered these executives' unique journey into a middle market corner office of their own. I know you enjoy these CEO stories as much as I've enjoyed recording them, so thank you for listening today. And if you like what you've heard, rate us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm looking forward to you joining me on the next great middle market CEO adventure into the corner office. My guest today is Martin Myers, CEO and co-founder of Trelus, an online platform transforming the misaligned marketplace for middle market business owners seeking growth equity or to exit. Trelus was built from the ground up to empower owners, giving them more control of their outcomes and legacy with smart tools and intelligent matching to a peer-reviewed network of win-win advisors, investors, and buyers. Martin's professional career includes executive-level experience spanning startups, Fortune 500 financial institutions, and advisory work for global private equity firms. Martin has a BBA in finance from Baylor University, a Master of Liberal Arts from St. John's College, and an MBA from Loyola College in Maryland. Martin lives in St. Louis with his wife and has 4 children. Martin Myers, welcome into the corner office.
Brant, thank you. It's an honor to be here.
It's great to have you here today. And we're recording this, I think, respectively about 8 to 10 weeks into this crisis. And these are very interesting times, both personally and professionally. How are you holding up, Martin, during these interesting pandemic times?
You know, we're holding up well. And I would say it's been an environment that has brought our family closer together, which is, a nice, silver lining amongst all the pain and suffering. Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. And we were talking just before the podcast. I think you have, is it 3 adult children in various ages? 4. Right. Got it. And most of them are home and 1 or 2 are on their way from what I understand.
That's right.
I had a couple of weeks with my 21-year-old and just her and I, and we did a lot of grilling. We played a lot of puzzles. And I thought back after she left and went home to her mom, I've never had that much time alone with her. And it was truly, truly a blessing. But let's start about you and your early years, Martin. Tell us a little bit about where you grew up and what your early family life was like, parents, siblings.
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up in San Antonio, Texas. So I'm a native Texan and, a pretty typical middle-class family. And I would say the words that I would use to kind of describe our home life was a lot of love and a lot of laughter. And I attribute that to my parents. We had the kind of house that, your friends in the neighborhood liked being at our house. And in high school, a lot of my friends and even in college, just liked hanging out with my parents. And my parents were very welcoming and open to, our friends and just created a fun place to be. So, and it's still that way when we get together for holidays with all the cousins and, my siblings. It's just, we have a lot of fun. So.
That's awesome. Well, we both connected through C12. And for those of you that don't know, C12 is a global peer advisory group for CEO Christian owners, of which both Martin and I are. I'm connected to a Connecticut group. And Martin, I believe you're in the St. Louis group. Did you grow up as a believer? Was it a Christian home as well?
That's right. So church was a big part of our lives growing up. And it was something that there was no question that we were going to be going to church on Sunday. And actually during the week, it was a pretty big church, very vibrant youth group. So we were there, kind of oftentimes throughout the week, especially as we got as we got older. And so that was really important to my parents, and they instilled that in us. And so it was a central part of our lives.
Tell me about your mom and dad. What kind of work did they do? Did mom work outside the home?
Sure. So my father was an attorney, a practicing attorney for years in San Antonio, a small firm, but just a very well-established, well-respected firm in San Antonio. And then my mom was a journalism major, and so she went into journalism after college, and they met in college at University of Texas when he was in law school. And so worked for a number of newspapers, and then when she had kids, went home full time, and then, but actually, to her credit, went back to journalism after we, kind of got out of the nest. Yeah.
Brothers and sisters?
Two sisters, two older sisters, 5 and 7 years older. So I was,
wow. So
I was the baby boy. I was the
and the boy baby. Wow.
I was both spoiled and picked on, I think.
I can imagine. Yeah, those babysitting years. I have two older brothers. I'm the youngest of three as well, 7 and 10 years older. And yeah, sometimes I wish for outside babysitters. What about early influencers? Perhaps starting with mom and dad, maybe some of the things you might have mentioned or remembered that they mentioned when you were younger, or perhaps coaches or teachers that inspired you during those younger years?
It was really my parents. There were certainly our pastor at our church in San Antonio was a big influence on me, and our youth pastor was a big influence on me. And then, but it was really my parents. My dad, he was home every day by 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock at the latest, and we had family meals together. And he really was intentional about that. So we grew up, even though he was an attorney, we grew up solidly middle class, and that was really a choice that he made to have balance in his life and spend time with family. And so he taught me to fly fish and to play golf. And we just, those moments and those times were really a big part of, of who I am and who I became. And my mom is just this person who my dad described her at one point as the light in the room, right? She's just this amazingly joyous person, incredibly high energy person. And she's still that way today. She kind of runs circles. She's in her 80s and runs circles around, most of us. And so, they really, it's hard to, when you look back at early childhood, it's really kind of hard to parse what was software and what was hardware, right? Who I am today and what was kind of the nature versus nurture. But, I do notice that just things over time, my dad was the first person to really introduce me to the concept of spiritual disciplines, the writings of Richard Foster and Dallas Willard. And so it was one of those things that I not only kind of read those books, but then I saw him, especially later in life. He was the person that every morning when you got up, he was there at the kitchen table reading his Bible, writing in his journal, and he read this daily devotional called God Calling that he ended up passing on to me. And again, me, looking much later in life, those are the same, practices that I have.
That's awesome.
And so he didn't just kind of hand me the books, he kind of lived it. And I ended up kind of, started doing that same thing.
I have a devotional book called Jesus Calling, which is a terrific one. And that modeling of daily devotions, which is a very important part of, Buck, who is our founder, Buck Jacobs of C12. He's a firm believer in that. And I think he's up to 10,000 days or from what I gather. But there's nothing better than kind of getting your day right with Jesus.
That's right.
Were you a good student in school, Martin?
I was a late bloomer. I was, there's a common thread. I'm kind of your ADD entrepreneur. And so, people with ADD kind of in elementary school and high school, my mind was always kind of off other places. It wasn't necessarily focused on like the instructions for the next test. But in college, it really took. There was kind of my second year in college is really when academically I kind of took off. But early on, I'd say, average student. And then, and I was into sports, but more individual sports, like things like, running, triathlons, marathons, that kind of thing.
Other than sports and school, anything, music, theater, debate, were you involved in some other extracurriculars?
No, it was really just, track, golf. I did play golf and then, just really, I loved bike riding. So I would ride all over San Antonio. This was a day and age when you could actually do that. And I would ride my bike downtown San Antonio. I would ride. And that's when I ended up getting into first bike racing. And then I got into triathlons later. Yeah.
Nice. And you can continue to do triathlons or bike race?
No, I've jumped to just running, the bike takes so long that it's just, I've kind of pared down. And I don't like getting in a cold swimming pool. So we pared down to just running.
What about entrepreneurial things? Did you have the ubiquitous paper route? Were you doing other things to generate pocket money while you were growing up?
I did. I did the paper route thing, and it didn't really take. And I don't know. In hindsight, I think it might have been sort of one getting up at 6 in the morning on a Sunday. Yeah, exactly. And folding papers. But I think really what it was, I'm kind of especially back then, I was pretty shy and more introvert than extrovert. And so the idea, and if you remember, like back then, you were the collection.
Oh, yeah. It's knocking on the door. Yeah, that's right.
So it probably didn't feel that way to my neighbors, but I kind of felt like I was shaking them down for money and and
wasn't comfortable.
Yeah, it just wasn't my nature. So that once I realized I was having to do that, I was like, no, I'm not going to do this. So I did the lawns in the neighborhood with a neighbor friend, and then I ended up mowing the properties for a property management company in San Antonio.
There you go.
And then expanded, and I drove their parking lot sweeper at night. So there's this big machine that sweeps the parking lot. It's the most boring job in the world. You're literally just going back and forth, so you mow a lawn during the day, and then at night you go out at like 10 o'clock at night and you're sweeping the parking lots that are empty at a big grocery store. So that's a motivator to study.
Probably not a bad job for an introvert. Didn't have to have a lot of contact with other people. What other kind of jobs did you have during high school leading up to college?
Bagging groceries was another one. Yep. So grocery bagger. Yep.
And you got union wages back then, or maybe in Texas you didn't. I know in California that was the case. I know kids were earning, what's this, 30, 40 years ago, $10, $12 an hour. I mean, that was good money back then.
It was. And, I had people who would try and tip me for bagging their groceries. Back then, you're literally bagging them and carrying them out to the car. And we weren't supposed to take tips, but people would actually just force it in your pocket, which is a little extra change. Yeah.
That's so nice. So was it clear that you'd go on to college, Martin?
Oh, there was no question. Yeah, there was no question. Yeah. And I ended up going to Baylor, and it was a school my dad had gone to for a year before he ended up transferring to University of Texas. He grew up in really a very modest household, and so they couldn't afford Baylor. His father actually ended up dying when he was pretty young, and so he ended up transferring to the University of Texas. But Baylor was just always on my radar, and I wanted a smaller school as opposed to a bigger school, and so it appealed to me, and I liked the the values, the Christian, kind of Southern Baptist component, and so I ended up going to Baylor.
And you've got 3 degrees. You from Baylor, you worked for a bit, and we'll get to that in a minute. You went to St. John's and got your MA in liberal arts, and then later got your MBA at Loyola College in Maryland. So education has been an important part of your foundation.
It is. It's actually interesting. So when I went to Baylor, as I mentioned, I was kind of a late bloomer academically. And so I had a girlfriend at the time who was very academic. And so this is kind of when I was sophomore, junior, and if I was going to be with her, I kind of had to be at the library. and I actually started reading these books that they were giving me in these chapters, and all of a sudden my grades shot up. I was like, oh, okay, so this is how this works.
This is how it works. And put some time into it, you get results.
Right. It was amazing. And it was, I think that's common for people with ADD. You kind of get into a fixed mindset. If you think of fixed mindset versus growth mindset, and you think it's you. In reality, it's just sort of, once you start to focus on things, especially later in college, you're starting to get into classes that are really more what you're interested in learning. And you kind of dive into those. And so my grades really shot up. And then I realized that, I had a love for learning actually. And so I felt this weird gap in my education. It was interesting. So when I graduated from Baylor, I went and I met with a friend of mine. His dad was a prominent businessman in San Antonio. And I went to talk to him about what I was going to do next, just get his advice. And so I told him, I said, I was graduated with a finance degree. I said, I'm thinking about going back and getting a master's in English. And he just looked at me like, what are you thinking? Why are you doing this? And I didn't even really know it at the time, but I realized I kind of avoided liberal arts and those types of classes, English and history. And I just felt like I felt like I couldn't really write very well. I just, didn't feel like even though I graduated from this great institution, didn't have quite that education that I needed. And so I ended up filling that gap later when I went to St. John's, but it was this thing that I identified kind of at that point.
Well, you got your undergrad in finance, and you've spent most of your career, in fact, well, I guess mostly all of your career, particularly with Trelus, and we'll get to that in a minute. But, you worked for a number of banks and worked in financial and mortgage institutions. What led you to finance? What was kind of the moment when you felt that was the right degree, and why did you ultimately pursue that form of study, that discipline?
Yeah, that goes back to a Sunday school teacher that I had was a business person. He was in real estate, actually. And so I really picked business because of him. And then when I got to school, accounting was just too linear for me. Again, sort of it gets to that. I liked things. There was more variety. I needed more variety. I needed things that were not as kind of clearly defined. And so finance just appealed to me for that reason. And so that's why I ended up going into finance.
Yeah, good. What was that first job you took out of college?
So the first job out of college was at a savings and loan. So I moved to Washington, D.C. That was the other thing. This friend of mine, his father advised me to go to California. He said, California's booming. You should go there. And I ignored his advice.
I went the opposite way.
I did. And it was really because I was going, I didn't know anybody in California. There happened to be a number of people from Baylor who were moving to D.C. It was actually the George Bush the first George Bush administration. So there were a number of people going for that reason. And so I knew people in D.C. So I picked D.C., oddly enough, and worked for an S&L that was fairly sizable, about $6 billion institution that was in all three states there, Maryland, Virginia, and D.C.
Got it. And did you get some leadership responsibilities early on, or was it more individual contributor at that assignment?
It was more, we went through, so I got into a management training program where they for a year take you through all the functional areas of the bank. And then I really wanted to end up on a trade desk. But those, you didn't go straight from the management training program into the trade desk at this bank. I ended up being on a trade desk later in my career. But so I just went into the accounting department and really just, I didn't even have any managerial kind of role there. That wasn't later until I went to Prudential Home Mortgage, which then evolved to become kind of Wells Fargo Mortgage later.
Got it. So tell me about the first time you started managing people. When was that? And was it hard for you?
It was later in life. It was, I want to say it started actually when I jumped to NexStar. So NexStar was a startup that was backed by KKR, the big private equity firm. So I made the leap after I left the work world to go to St. John's. So I actually just took a hiatus from work for a year and a half.
Oh, so you did your master's in liberal arts at full time?
Yeah, went full time. I realized there was it's a very unique program, just to go on a little bit of a rabbit trail there. It's a great books program where you actually read the original texts of, kind of the great books of Western civilization. So it kind of all starts with Aristotle and then work your way up. So it's, they do it in the graduate school, they do it by discipline. So you do philosophy and theology. One semester you do math and science. Another semester you do, English another semester. And so you really, it was this thing where I realized these are the books that I could spend a lifetime reading and still might not do it. And I actually happened to, fortunately or unfortunately, I was in a car accident where I got not life-changing money, but a little bit of money that allowed me to really quit my job and go do that full time. And so that's what I did.
So that was kind of the seminal moment. You had the accident, got a reward, and kind of said, now it's a good time to stop work.
That's right. And I was getting a little bit bored. And again, I felt like there was this hole in my education. And so that's really why I went to St. John's. And it really was a big inflection point for me because I think I after the program, I was considering going to get a PhD. And the idea was to study ethics and actually combine the business and the philosophy and do like business ethics. And then, but then I was newly married and getting ready to raise a family. And I really wised up about another 5 years.
Delivering a paycheck.
Right? Yes. And I really realized I kind of solved what I was looking to solve when I graduated from Baylor.
Did you feel that you filled the hole?
I filled the hole, and then I went back to Wells Fargo and worked with the same people I'd worked with before.
But that was only for a year or two, because then you went on to get your MBA, or did you do the MBA as an executive program?
I did it as an executive program.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. So I did some managing when I was at Wells Fargo, and then again at NexStar when we went to NexStar, and so but really not. just kind of typical management and kind of, I was working my way up, but we're a very flat organization. So I didn't manage, tons of people, usually a handful.
We've all had mentors as we've gone along in our career. I can certainly remember the name of several, but there's always a couple of tormentors along the way. Not that you need to mention any, and we wouldn't want to do that. But, I've found certainly with a lot of our CEO guests, sometimes some of the best lessons are some of the worst behavior we observe with others, or things that we might see in the workplace and say, wow, I'll never do that. Do you have any recollection of any of that during your days while you were going through various corporate operations?
Certainly. My first job
wasn't hard to think of, was it?
Perpetual savings bank. He was a really wonderful boss in a lot of ways, and I learned a lot from him on the positive side. But he was just a perfectionist, off the charts perfectionist, and to the point where you would just spend a lot of time doing things like folding a paper to make sure that everything was perfectly aligned on a presentation, and so I learned that was not how I was going to be. Keeping people working late. Right, there was no 80-20 with him.
Now, you spent a good long period of time, almost about 20 years in total, at two different companies, Nexstar Financial and then NexSpring. Now, I don't know if those were related. I think you were probably instrumental in starting up NexSpring, if I'm not mistaken. But tell us a little bit about those years and, kind of how your career, progressed before actually getting into Trelus.
Yeah. So, no, that the same people really everything past that first company, I essentially was working with the same people. So when I went back to Wells Fargo, some of the key executives at Wells Fargo started Nexstar Financial. So it was a startup in St. Louis. And so as I was talking to them, they convinced me to move out here to the Midwest, and it was a great move. DC is a great place to live, very much shaped who I am in a lot of ways, but not an easy place to raise a family, and so we moved to St. Louis, and I was employee number 16, and it was, KKR backed it. So it was backed by KKR, the big private equity firm, and they put a lot of money into it. So it was really fast growing. I was now in the trade desk environment where we were hedging and managing interest rate risk, and that was really exciting. And
that's where you wanted to go earlier on.
That's right. Yeah. So I ended up kind of getting that opportunity and just working with people who were super high performing, super smart, and and then I followed them. We sold that company. That company was sold in 2005. And then 3 of the executives formed NexSpring. And so I was employee number 1 then at NexSpring. Wow. And so I won't bore you with the details, but really the company was formed to work with the Blackstone Group, another large private equity firm. And so we ended up, really, the financial crisis was starting to happen. And so Blackstone essentially put our company on retainer for 2 years, down during that financial crisis, looking at opportunities. And that I loved doing that.
Because that was 2007, right? You got started with NexSpring in 2007. So right at the apex of it, right?
Right.
Well, that world has a reputation of being, kind of brutal. And certainly, we've learned a lot through that, financial crisis about a lot of the wrongdoings. And yet nobody ever went to jail. So we don't need to go down that rabbit hole. But, you're a man of faith. How did you kind of balance that between your, Christian core values and I'm sure going up against folks that perhaps didn't quite have the same level of integrity or ethics that you did?
That's a great question. I think we really stayed away from that, and probably because if I look back at the folks at Blackstone, they were wickedly smart, incredibly tenacious, but they were also really just good people. I think they had a really amazing job at hiring just top-notch people, and they cared very much about culture. It was one we certainly at NexStar, I attribute to our leadership at NexStar, Rick Thornberry and the other leaders at NexStar with creating a really compelling culture and where people felt valued and felt cared for. And I was just really also taken with the culture at Blackstone and got to really get to know them. And what we saw were a lot of the opportunities that we were looking at were people who had done some things that were not probably very ethical, integrity worthy, and that's what had gotten them in that situation. And some of the opportunities we looked at, it really wasn't their fault, right? It was we had an amazing meeting. There was a large brokerage firm. It's a household name that I probably can't say the name of it, but they had gotten into some distress because of some assets that they had, mortgage-related assets. And so they were looking for just kind of some rescue capital. And so we were in there with Blackstone, brought in by Blackstone. The folks at Bear Stearns were also brought in. And BlackRock was presenting sort of the data to this group. And they were basically showing that home price appreciation, which was kind of the historic norm, was now home price depreciation. And they were saying, basically, they're saying, if you believe these numbers, the guy literally says this, he says, if you believe these numbers, he says, then you should probably be shorting or betting on the downward price of every bank in this country. And he was right. And literally the people who were at Bear Stearns that were kind of with us looking at this opportunity, a few weeks later, Bear Stearns was gone. So it was just amazing time.
And you obviously did this for a number of years. You came through the crisis, and then you evolved to Trelus a few years later. I think there was 3 or 4 years, I think, from the time that you actually left NexSpring or perhaps molded that into Trelus. Tell us a little bit about those years.
No, it was really, this kind of gets back to this idea of being a kind of an ADD entrepreneur. So when we were doing the work with Blackstone, we did some entrepreneurial stuff at NexSpring as well, but we started getting into more traditional consulting, and it started to get somewhat repetitive. And we had a big project with a company that we worked on for a year, and we did a great job. It was kind of a turnaround for a large company, and we took a little time off towards the end of that, and I just had some time to think about some ideas that I was having about starting a company on my own. And the work was, I'm happiest when my learning curve is kind of steep. It's kind of up and to the right. And so it just didn't feel that way. It just, and so I thought, I'm going to just really explore this, idea that I had. And so that was what led to Trelus.
And you're a co-founder. So again, was this from one of your previous partners, or is it someone else that you met along the way?
That's somebody that came along the way. So Tabitha Sheaver joined me a little bit later, very complimentary to me. We're kind of that, you want to have somebody that their strengths are kind of matched up with your weaknesses, right? And she's very much that way. She describes, what does she call it? She's kind of the microwave and I'm the slow cooker.
It's good to have both combinations.
Yeah.
And you've been a couple of years in business now. So tell us a little bit about Trelus, what you do, and, the type of services you provide.
Yeah. So, the story around Trelus is, kind of a key insight that I had was this harsh reality for business owners of small to mid-sized companies that, let's call it, kind of 10 million in sales to 100 million or more.
Yeah, lower middle market.
Yeah. And that most of these owners are not serial entrepreneurs, right? 90% of them, and they get this one shot at this very high stakes, kind of once in a lifetime event, and their wealth a lot of times is all tied up or mostly tied up in their business. And so, and it's this marketplace that's very much misaligned and predatory. So in my prior life with the, NexStar and NexSpring, it was all very relational. The investment banks that we knew and the private equity firms that our partners ended up getting us involved with was all very much relationship driven. And I realized that these small to mid-sized owners don't have those relationships. And some of those relationships are kind of scary, right? It's a very misaligned and too often predatory market. And so, and it doesn't end well. Unfortunately, a lot of owners, around 75% report having a negative outcome. And so you have this high stakes event, a lot of negative outcomes, and when it's negative, right, it's not just the owner that's impacted, it's the employees, right? It's the community, it's partners, family members.
All the stakeholders,
Yeah. And so our vision for Trelus was really it's kind of this bold vision of transforming this marketplace that we think is broken and misaligned in a lot of ways, and really shift it to being one that's more relational, more, less zero sum, more win-win, less transactional, more relational, and more people centered. And so you can kind of think of it as this combination of eHarmony plus Angie's List for owners who are going through this process. And it's, we're creating a safe and trusted community that's, we call it for owners and by owners. And what that means is, it's interesting. One of our key insights was that, when it comes to their exit and an owner's thinking about their exit, the person that they trust more than, their lawyer, their CPA, their wealth manager, or even a family member is a fellow business owner who has been through the process. And so we have created this ecosystem that's really controlled, a network, and you can think of it as a community of advisors, investors, and buyers who can apply to be on the platform, and they have to be the ones that other owners said, these were the people who were win-win. These are kind of the play fair, keep your promises, best-in-class partners. And so, our job really, we think of it as helping owners transition well by following the path of other owners who have transitioned well. And to really beat those odds that I talked about. And so take control of their outcome and their legacy, and really kind of stick the landing on this goal, and to do it in a more purposeful way too, because a lot of times the owner in their exit calculus, they're thinking money, right? Which is fair, and you should, but there's other parts of the calculus as well, right? Other parts of the equation, which is the people side. And a lot of times the owners don't really think about that. And how do you do this in a purposeful way? And we ended up also kind of coming to a partnership with C12 Group that you mentioned, where we are the platform for their what they call the 310 Coalition, which is not just a sort of these play fair, keep your promises, win-win, partners, but people who share C12's values and will help C12 members navigate this in a God-honoring way, and so in a purposeful way as well. So,
and are you working with them only on their exit, or do you come in, maybe a year or two out before they're planning to do so? I mean, is it a process, or is it more of, I've made the decision and then I come on the platform to seek advice and counsel?
The earlier the better, really. We certainly come with.
But it is with the goal towards an exit.
It is, or it can be growth capital. So sometimes it's, the same thing. If you want to bring in an investment partner, it's very much like a marriage, right? That's the eHarmony piece. You want it to be a good marriage. And even when you're selling it, if you care about your people and what happens to them after the transaction, if you're going to sell it to a private equity firm or even to another company, you want to at least be aware of what this means, right, to those people, if you care about those people. And so we help them do that.
Yeah. Is it just the two of you, or do you have employees, multiple offices? Tell us a little bit about your organization.
3 in St. Louis, and then 2 in Austin. And then we have a colleague in London, but he's with us, kind of just on a project by project basis.
Right. So when you think about company culture, it is kind of the culture of the platform. So, as CEO, that's your responsibility. How do you go about doing that across, and how many members or people are on your platform today? I'm sure it changes a little bit, but on average, how many folks are engaged?
Yeah. So on average, it's about 30, and we usually have about a third to a quarter of those will be business owners at any one point in time.
Wow. Yeah.
Yep. And it's growing. So we're, even in this environment, we're seeing more owners are aware that, I think they always thought the market was going to keep going up. So that's not the case, right? And so planning and thinking ahead for that transition is as important now as any time. And there are also some who are being opportunistic and saying, are there opportunities for me to acquire other companies in this time period? So, yeah.
So when it comes to the culture of Trelus, are you personally communicating with them? Do you vet them, I suppose? And, what do you do to try to build the culture, with your broader platform?
For our company itself, or for the...
Yeah, for I guess for the company's ideas, right, and core values with the folks that you want to have there. I mean, you don't have a large organization, so that's probably not as much of a challenge, but I'm sure people need to understand who you are and what you're all about, and, whether or not that's a good fit for them. How do you go about doing that?
Yeah, so we have, kind of our core values, and it's really around innovation. It's around excellence. It's around integrity. It's around putting the owner first, putting their needs. This is, we're really solving this problem, which is a kind of a misaligned market where a lot of there are advisors who put their own needs right ahead of the needs of the client, and it can be tempting to do that. And so we've kind of created multiple layers of trust really in our product and in our our values, right? And structurally within our company, we don't take any big success fees. It's all kind of fee-based subscription type revenue. And so we really are looking at how can we build it's all about trust.
I mean, all these 30 companies, right? I mean, you had opportunities to chat with them or you or your partner engage with them. Is that part of the vetting process?
We have a vetting process. It's there's some backdoor vetting and front door vetting. But one of the key things is they have to have referrals to owners who have done a transaction or worked with them in some advisory capacity. And so we talk to those owners. And usually they come to us through somebody who knows we're looking for this kind of owner-centric ethos, right? And so there's a little bit of a filter at the front end as well.
Well, listen, we're just about out of time, but I've got a couple more questions for you, Martin. And, on everyone's mind is, lots of speculation of what a post-COVID world's going to look like. Pull out your crystal ball and, kind of thinking broadly, what changes do you see ahead, particularly for, the lower middle market, that 10 million to 100 million, revenue size company?
That's a great question. Our company has just gotten accepted into an accelerator because we're still early stage startup, an accelerator called Praxis out of New York, and it's a kind of Christian focused accelerator. And they put out a really interesting piece recently that talks about this time and this crisis in 3 phases. And so the first, and they use the blizzard, winter, and ice age kind of metaphor. And so blizzard is kind of where we are right now, right? We kind of went into our homes and you're just like staying there, and just like you would in a blizzard, you're not going to go out and do anything. And then you move into the winter where you can kind of go back out. But their thesis is that this is right. Yeah, this is a mini ice age. So things are going to change, and you have to essentially adapt to the new world, right? It's not going to go back to normal anytime soon. And so, if you were, selling swimsuits, right? You're not going to be selling swimsuits anymore in a mini ice age, right? So and every company is affected differently. I think, what we have been. We launched a new kind of mini webinar series for owners during this time, and one of the categories of that series is basically battle-tested advice from former, kind of CEOs and current CEOs who've kind of been through really challenging environments. Because our perspective, and this is similar to I think the piece from Praxis, is that every owner right now is essentially a wartime CEO, right?
That's right.
And so you really have to look at the tactics and strategies in this environment are very different than, kind of being a normal CEO. And so that means, yes, you do have to play defense, but you really also have to think about how you're going to play offense and how you're going to adapt and how you're going to take advantage, if that's the way to put it, in this environment, and at least survive and innovate. And we've certainly done that.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Appreciate your perspective. Well, lastly, Martin, we always ask this question of our guests. What career and life advice would you give to someone perhaps who has their eyes on a corner office at their middle market company today, or perhaps like yourself, decides to be an entrepreneur at some point in time?
I think I can speak better to the entrepreneur path because that's really been my path. It's very different, I think, than the corporate ladder, climbing path. And, a mentor of mine, a guy who I really have a lot of respect for, I have mentors who I know and mentors that I don't know, right? We always have these mentors. This is somebody who I've met, but he and I are not, we don't talk all the time, but a guy named Mike Maples. He's a VC at a firm called Floodgate, and he talks about, when you're doing a startup, doing something that is really worthy of your talent. If it's going to be, to me, doing a startup is what I describe as this self-inflicted pain and suffering. And
you got to be a glutton for punishment.
You got to be, and so if you're going to go through this self-inflicted pain and suffering, whether you do something really big and game changing, or if you do something kind of small and that's not going to be that significant. So you might as well pick something that's game changing, right? Because you're going to go through the challenges regardless. And so his view is like, do something that's kind of worthy of your talent, right? And so to me, I think it's about seeking out a vision and a mission. As a leader, you're really called to cast this vision and mission, right? And to set the culture that aligns with that, and then manage yourself in a way that aligns with that, and then bring in high performing people that also align with that. So to me, it's really about finding this vision and mission that is much bigger than yourself, because a lot of times ego is what gets in the way of success. And so hopefully you are doing something that's going to make the world a better place, and it's really about that and not about you. And then I think getting out over your skis is and really leaning into that pain and suffering and seeing that as a way of transforming yourself, and how that makes you a better person and a better leader.
Well, Mart Myers, CEO and co-founder of Trelus, thank you so much for sharing your journey into the corner office. Be safe and stay inside during this blizzard. And I wish you well as we all venture out into the winter and perhaps a long ice age. Well, but we'll remain optimistic because we've got the Lord looking over us, right?
That's right. Yep. Thank you, Brant.
Thank you for listening to Into the Corner Office with Brant Hanley. We hope you enjoyed hearing our guest CEO story as much as we did. If you want to hear more CEOs reveal their journey into the corner office, please subscribe via iTunes and tell your friends and colleagues. For more information about Brant, Resource Options International, and the mighty middle market, visit www.goforroi.com. We look forward to having you join us for our next episode.